Volunteer firefighters are a key part of the state's network of first responders, but the patchwork system of volunteers is struggling to meet local demands as a result of challenging financial situations and a lack of volunteers. For more on this landscape and the potential policy responses from state policymakers, we're joined on the Capitol Press Room by John D'Alessandro, Secretary of the Firefighters Association of New York State. Welcome back to the show, John.
Thank you very much.
So this is not a new issue that you and I have covered. So I'm curious, where do things stand now, and how would you frame the, say, lack of volunteers in particular compared to, say, the last 4 or 5 years?
Unfortunately, we've seen a steady decline in the number of volunteer firefighters and EMS personnel. This is something that started, 15, 20 years ago. A lot of it is attributable to changing attitudes in society, less community commitment, people are more mobile, people have less free time. The Firefighters Association started about 15 years ago to look at the problem and try to come up with a strategy to reverse this trend. We've been basically using what I call traditional methods. We've gone out and educated departments. We've done train the recruiter classes at the local level. We've done a statewide outreach campaign with the tagline, "Is there a fire in you?" where someone can go and find out what their local department is. And these traditional efforts have stopped the bleeding in a sense. And by that I mean we've held firm in the last number of years. There's about 80,000 volunteers across the state, but any department, every department can use more people. The more hands you have, the less the load falls on the group, the smaller group. We could have all the great technology in the world, but if you don't have trained, dedicated men and women who will respond when they're needed, the technology doesn't have a lot of value.
Well, as you alluded to, there are about 80,000 volunteer firefighters today, down from about 120,000 in the early 2000s. Have you identified anything that state policymakers could do that you think would either hold the line or potentially see those numbers grow back to where they were 2 decades ago?
First and foremost, as simple as it sounds, is basic education. In many communities around New York, the public believes that, there's a paid crew of firefighters in that firehouse 24/7. They don't realize that over 90% of the fire and emergency response in the state is covered by volunteers. So it's that basic education, letting the community know who is protecting them and that we need more people. We will continue the traditional efforts, but this year we took a step back. We said, look, we stopped the bleeding, but we need to start moving forward now. We need to get more people to join. So we came up with what we call the Volunteer Optimization Legislative Initiative, or VOLI. It's a grouping of 14 different incentives that departments can utilize to attract new volunteers and retain the ones they have. It's a complex problem because, as we say, we can get people on the state level through our outreach campaign interested or curious about becoming a volunteer, but the deal is sealed at the firehouse door. They have to have the tools to make that person want to join and then make that person give the time and effort to stay there. And that's different everywhere. You literally could have 2 neighboring departments. One is doing fine financially and in terms of manpower, and the neighboring department is struggling. So it's a very complex, localized set of items that causes this drop in volunteers.
So one of the things that stands out to me about this conversation, and you sort of just spoke to it, about how one neighborhood might have one experience and another neighborhood might have its own unique set of challenges, and the response has been, and even historically, the response has been, well, let's do these credits and let's find ways to increase perks. And it seems to all add up to this whole patchwork system where even if I'm interested in it, I'm going to have to apply for this tax credit and this credit. Is the simpler solution the one that's just staring us in the face, which is the state or county governments? Somebody should just pay all these people?
Well, on the surface, that always seems like a quick fix. There's no silver bullet here.
Okay.
When you start talking about paying volunteers, then you start running into, do you create a worse situation than you have now? And by that I mean, you could have 2 departments, and I know of numerous instances of this, 2 departments, neighboring departments. One is fairly stable financially. They could potentially afford to pay people to respond to calls or sit on a duty shift.
Sure.
And the neighboring department can't. The neighboring department, the less financially stable one, is generally the one that needs more people. So now you've set up a situation where if a person who is not a firefighter is thinking about joining a department, logically, where are they going to go? They're going to go to the department that could pay and the department that probably doesn't need as many new people as the other one. So again, we don't want the cure to be worse than the disease. That's why we come up with these 14 different points. And yes, you're right. They are all incentives in one form or another. Some have some cost on the state level. Some have some cost on the local level. Some have no cost at all. But again, the more we can give to a department, the more they can pick and choose and fit it to their needs. And we're not against what they call nominal compensation. We just have an issue with providing monetary dollars, you've gone to X calls this quarter, so you get a check for a certain amount of money. We'd rather see it to compensate volunteers, both current and new ones, for like with gift cards, gas cards. That's one thing we hear all the time. I have to take my own car and get to the firehouse and then go home. And if I'm an active firefighter, this starts to add up significantly. Tax credits. Right now, a volunteer gets a $200 New York State income tax credit. It's been the same for 22 years. $200 in this economy is not an incentive for somebody to join the volunteer force or to stay there. So we've argued for years, let's raise it to $800, and then let's also provide a pathway that is somebody who's very active, who wants to go to duty shifts or run a lot of calls, that they could get additional tax credits. So you can see we're trying to do a broad-based approach to this, in addition to educating the public.
Yeah, and some of the other incentives are reimbursements, and there's even a child tax credit that you guys are looking at here. Well, is this a response to what you're hearing from people who say this is what I would need to keep doing this, or this is what I would need in order to, jump into this with both feet?
It is. Again, we've been doing this for 15, 16 years. We get a lot of feedback from the field. There's almost 1,800 volunteer departments across the state of New York, and they range from extremely financially stable ones with a lot of people in one part of the state to departments that, if it wasn't for the bake sale and the members chipping in.
Pancake sale, too. Don't forget that one.
True. Breakfast, pancake sale. Chipping in with their own money, they wouldn't have equipment or always fuel to get the trucks out. So these things are in response to what we're hearing. You mentioned the child care tax credit. We hear often, look, I'm currently a firefighter. I would love to be able to come run a call on a weekend, but unfortunately my spouse is out working and I can't leave the kids. I have nowhere to leave the kids. Or same thing at night, just can't leave the kids alone. So in some areas, that child care tax credit, which the state, rightfully gives to lower income people, we argue make it available to volunteer firefighters. You're not really giving them anything. You're just making an exchange for their time.
Well, finally, the other side of the equation, sticking with the finances of these volunteer departments, is there anything that needs to be done to shore up their backbone, whether it's the capital needs or just their operating needs so they can keep the lights on and pay for gas?
Yeah, that is becoming an increasing challenge also. Just by way of an example, a few years ago, just a normal run-of-the-mill engine, a basic piece of firefighting apparatus cost, say, maybe $750, $1 million if you customized it a little bit. You're up pushing almost $2 million now. Ladder truck is way over $2 million. So you can see where these local departments, especially in small communities, rural communities, where the tax base at best is stable and usually is worse than that, coming up with this kind of money. They're forced to keep apparatus in service, longer and longer and invest maintenance and parts and all that stuff. So it is a challenge. But, the answer to that is not also, putting more taxes on the backs of the residents of the community. We talk about affordability in New York, so there's got to be a balance there where a department needs to have the financial resources to be adequately prepared, but at the same time, not force people to not be able to live in that community or, frankly, not live in New York State.
Are you finding, though, that if you're a community where maybe you don't have a strong firefighting force, people don't want to live there, and then you get caught in this vicious cycle as well? It's
a catch-22. It is very well can be a catch-22. But I do have to stress, while this is a significant challenge in some parts of the state and in some departments, this is not a crisis now. I don't want anybody to think when they dial 911, nobody's going to show up. The dedicated men and women who volunteer in your community will come to your house on their hands and knees, dragging buckets of water if they have to. But all kidding aside, I don't know of any situation where somebody has dialed 911 and nobody has showed up. We work around it. We have mutual aid agreements. In my particular town in Saratoga County, there's 4 departments that service the town. So during those hours of 6 a.m. to 6 p.m., generally when everybody's off in Albany, Schenectady, or Troy working, we have mutual agreements to assure that there's going to be enough manpower to deal with whatever situation arises. So we can have those things. But again, more people lightens the load. Despite all the great technology, firefighting, emergency response is a full contact sport. And the more people we have, the less of a burden it puts on the people we currently have. It lessens burnout. It just makes it easier for us to do our job effectively and safely.
Well, lastly, we've been thinking about this as a local response. What are your feelings about taking it out of the hands of localities, not relying on local tax bases to fund things, the local donations to keep things running? Why not put it in the responsibility of the state and let the state coordinate, fund, and deploy all these resources?
Well, the simple fact is we did an economic study a few years back, and it showed that the volunteer fire service in New York saves taxpayers $3.8 billion dollars a year. So you can see the tremendous burden it would be if this became a state firefighting force. That's not even including you'd have to take over firehouses and appropriate equipment and make retribution for that. So it's a very complex, economic equation. And again, you also have the intricacies of the localities. Firefighting in a small town in the southern tier is not the same as firefighting in Long Island in terms of what you train for, because you'll find multi-story buildings in Long Island. You probably won't find them in the southern tier of the North Country. So, it's worked for over 200 years, this localized approach. That's not to say that we don't need to sort of find efficiencies, both in terms of response and purchasing and manpower. But the equation does work.
Well, unfortunately, that's all the time we have for this conversation. We've been speaking with John D'Alessandro, Secretary of the Firefighters Association, New York State. John, thanks for visiting us in the studio.
It's my pleasure. Anytime.
Support for the Capitol Press Room is provided by New York State United Teachers, a statewide union of nearly 700,000 professionals in education and healthcare.